The afternoon heat pressed down on Brooklyn like a heavy blanket, the kind of stillness that makes everything feel suspended in time. The streets behind Napoli Cafe were quiet, almost too quiet, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Dominic Valenti walked through the narrow alley behind his restaurant, his footsteps echoing against the cracked pavement. At 48 years old, he had the kind of presence that made people step aside without being asked. Broad shoulders, silver threading through his dark hair, and eyes that had seen things most people only read about in newspapers. To the world, Dominic was a success story. Owner of the most prestigious Italian restaurant chain in Brooklyn, a self-made man who had pulled himself up from nothing, a widower who had never remarried, who lived alone in a house too large for one person. But there was another side to Dominic Valenti, a side that operated in shadows, that commanded respect through whispered warnings, that had built an empire on foundations the police could never quite prove existed. He was the king of Brooklyn's underworld, and everyone who mattered knew it. Yet even kings have rules, and Dominic's most sacred rule, the one that separated him from the animals he despised, was simple and absolute. Children were off limits, always. Anyone who crossed that line faced consequences that made even hardened criminals lose sleep. The sound came from nowhere. Small feet slapping against broken concrete, frantic, desperate, the rhythm of someone running for their life. Dominic stopped, turned. A little girl burst into the alley like a frightened bird escaping a cage. She was maybe 7 years old with dark hair matted against her forehead from running, tear tracks cutting clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. Her pink backpack was torn, hanging off one shoulder. Her knees were scraped and bleeding. She saw Dominic and didn't slow down. Instead, she ran straight into him, her small hands grabbing fistfuls of his expensive suit jacket with a grip that spoke of absolute terror. The words that came out of her mouth would change everything. "Please," she gasped, her voice shaking so hard it barely held together. "Please act like you're my dad. He's coming back for me, and I can't let him find me again." Dominic felt something stir in the depths of his soul, something that had been sealed shut for 15 years. Before he could respond, the girl pressed herself behind him, using his body as a shield. Her small frame trembled against his legs like a leaf caught in a hurricane. Then he saw them. Two men at the mouth of the alley, moving fast, scanning the shadows. They wore cheap suits that couldn't hide the bulge of weapons underneath. Their faces carried the particular hardness that comes from years of doing things decent people never speak about. They spotted Dominic and froze. Recognition flickered across their features like lightning before a storm. The taller one's face went pale. The shorter one actually took a step backward. "Boss Valenti," the tall one said, his voice carrying forced respect mixed with genuine fear. "We didn't know you were here." Dominic's hand moved to rest protectively on the girl's shoulder. She was shaking so hard he could feel it through his palm. "And what exactly are you doing in my territory?" The men exchanged nervous glances. "Just collecting collateral for Mr. Corsetti," the shorter one said. "The girl's father owes money." Collateral. The word hit Dominic like a physical blow. They were calling this terrified 7-year-old girl collateral, like she was property, like she was something to be traded and bargained with. "How much does her father owe?" 20,000, plus interest. He borrowed it for his mother's surgery 6 months ago. Time's up. The girl's fingers dug deeper into Dominic's jacket. She whispered something so quietly only he could hear it. "They took me from the playground. They said they'd hurt my daddy if I ran again." Dominic felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. In 30 years of controlling the most powerful criminal organization on the East Coast, he had drawn lines that even his enemies respected. This line had just been crossed. "Tell me something," Dominic said, his voice dropping to that tone his lieutenants knew meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Does Vincent Corsetti know whose territory he's operating in?" Boss, we just follow orders. We don't. Here's a new order. Dominic's words cut through the air like a blade. You're going to walk away. You're going to tell Corsetti that this girl is under Valenti protection now. And you're going to explain to him that anyone who touches a child in this city has declared war on my family. The tall man's face went from pale to gray. Mr. Corsetti won't like that message. Good. I'm counting on it. The men didn't need to be told twice. Within seconds, the alley was empty except for Dominic and the trembling child still clinging to his jacket. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see her more clearly now. Dark eyes that held too much fear for someone so young. A determined set to her jaw that spoke of courage she probably didn't know she had. A face that reminded him of someone he had lost a long time ago. What's your name, sweetheart? Mira, she whispered. Mira Reyes. That's a beautiful name. I'm Dominic. Can you tell me what happened? The story came out in fragments, broken by hiccups and tears. Her daddy worked at a car garage. He fixed things. He was always tired because he worked 2 jobs. Her grandma got sick, really sick, and her daddy borrowed money to help her. But grandma went to heaven anyway, and then the bad men started coming around, asking for money they didn't have. Daddy tries so hard, Mira said, her voice cracking. He works all day and all night. Sometimes I don't see him for 2 days, but he always leaves me breakfast with a little note that says, I love you, my brave girl. She paused, her small face crumpling with a memory that clearly hurt. Last week, Daddy said he wasn't hungry at dinner, but I saw him give his food to me when he thought I wasn't looking. I pretended I didn't see because I didn't want him to feel bad. Dominic felt his throat tighten. This child, barely 7 years old, was already learning to protect her father's dignity, already carrying burdens no child should have to carry. He sounds like a good father. He is. He just... Mira's lower lip trembled. He's so tired all the time. And sad. He tries to hide it, but I can tell. She looked up at Dominic with those dark, trusting eyes. Mister, why did you help me? You don't even know me. The question hit him harder than he expected. Why had he helped? In his world, kindness was weakness. Compassion got you killed. But looking at this terrified little girl, who had been brave enough to run, smart enough to seek protection, desperate enough to trust a complete stranger, he saw something that reminded him of why he had gotten into this business in the first place. Before the power corrupted everything, before the violence became routine, before he had forgotten that some things were worth protecting. Because someone should have helped my sister when she needed it, he said quietly. And no one did. Mira studied his face with the intensity of someone far older than her years. Is your sister okay now? Dominic was silent for a long moment. She's watching from somewhere far away. Mira nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her. My grandma is far away too. Daddy says she's in heaven now. That's why he had to borrow money, to help her get better. But she went to heaven anyway. She reached out and took Dominic's hand in her small one. Maybe your sister and my grandma are friends up there. Maybe they're watching us together. A wall inside him began to crumble. A wall he had spent 15 years building, brick by brick, to keep the pain at bay. This child, with her simple words and her fierce courage, had found a crack in his armor that no enemy had ever discovered. The bakery belonged to Carmela, a woman who had worked for the Valenti family for 20 years. She asked no questions when Dominic arrived with a frightened child in tow. She simply brought out fresh cookies, warm milk, and the kind of gentle conversation that slowly coaxed the terror out of Mira's eyes. While Mira ate, Dominic made calls. The information came quickly. Julian Reyes, 35 years old, master mechanic at a garage on 5th Street. Wife died during childbirth 7 years ago. Had been raising Mira alone ever since. 6 months ago, His mother was diagnosed with cancer. Julian borrowed $20,000 from Vincent Corsetti, the only loan shark willing to lend without collateral. His mother died 2 months later. The debt remained. Interest compounded. Julian worked double shifts, sold his car, moved to a smaller apartment. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. And now Corsetti had taken his daughter. Dominic's lieutenant, Nico, delivered the rest of the news with the careful tone of someone delivering very bad information. Boss, Corsetti isn't just running a loan operation. He's got a whole system. Takes kids when parents can't pay, holds them until the money comes through. We've identified at least 6 other families in the same situation. How long has this been going on? Months, maybe longer. He's been operating out of Pier 17. Pier 17, Valenti territory. Corsetti had been running a child kidnapping operation right under Dominic's nose, on his own ground, making him look weak to every criminal organization on the East Coast. There's more, Nico said carefully. Corsetti's not working alone. He's got backing from the Benedetto family. They've been funding him for over a year. Dominic's jaw tightened. This isn't just about collecting debts, boss, Nico continued. It's about making you look weak. Every day Corsetti operates on your territory without consequences. The other families take notice. They're testing the waters. If you don't respond, they'll see blood in the water. Exactly. Corsetti is just the opening move. The Benedettos are playing a longer game. They want your territory, and they're using this to prove you've gone soft. Dominic processed this information in silence. What had started as a chance encounter in an alley was becoming something much larger, much more dangerous. This wasn't just about one little girl anymore. This was about power, territory, and enemies who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The message was from Corsetti himself. You took my leverage, so I'll take yours. Attached was a photograph. Dominic's blood turned to ice. The photo showed a teenage boy, maybe 14 years old, tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. Dark hair, defiant eyes that held no tears despite the obvious fear. Eyes that looked exactly like someone Dominic had loved and lost 15 years ago. Caleb, his nephew, his sister Serena's son, the boy he had been secretly supporting for 14 years through anonymous payments to his foster family, birthday cards with no return address, college funds set up under false names, a guardian angel who had never shown his face because he believed distance was protection. Corsetti had spent months investigating the Valenti family, searching for weaknesses. He discovered the anonymous payments, traced them back to Dominic, found the boy in foster care. He had done his homework. He knew exactly where to strike. A second message arrived. Pier 17, midnight, come alone, or the Valenti bloodline ends tonight. The hours before midnight moved like molasses. Dominic used every one of them. He called in favors that had been owed for decades. Positioned men in locations Corsetti would never think to check. Studied blueprints of the Pier 17 warehouse until he could navigate it blindfolded. And he made one call that surprised everyone who knew him. Julian Reyes arrived at the bakery looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a single day. His clothes were stained with motor oil. His eyes were red from crying. But when he saw Mira sitting at the counter, drawing pictures with crayons Carmela had found, something in his face transformed. Daddy! Mira launched herself off the stool and into her father's arms. Julian caught her, lifting her up, holding her so tight it looked like he was trying to absorb her into his own body. Baby girl, he choked out. Baby girl, I'm so sorry. Daddy should have been there. Daddy should have protected you. It's okay, Daddy. Mira's small hands patted his face. The nice man saved me. He pretended to be my daddy, and the bad men ran away. Watching Julian now holding his daughter like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth, Dominic understood. This was a man who would starve himself to feed his child, who would work himself to death to keep her safe, who had done everything right and still been punished for trusting the wrong people. Julian looked up, meeting Dominic's eyes for the first time. I don't know how to thank you. I don't have much. But whatever I have, Mr. Reyes, I didn't help your daughter for money. Then why? You don't know us. Because 15 years ago, my sister needed help. No one came. I won't let that happen to another family. Julian held Dominic's gaze for a long moment. He was not a stupid man. He had survived in Brooklyn long enough to know when he was in the presence of something dangerous. You're not just a restaurant owner, are you? No, but for your daughter's sake, that's all you need to know. Later, after Mira had fallen asleep on the bakery's worn couch, Dominic told Julian about the situation, about Corsetti, about the other children, about the midnight deadline, and about Caleb. He's your nephew? Julian asked. My sister's son. She died when he was 1 year old. I've been supporting him from a distance ever since. I thought keeping away would keep him safe. Dominic's voice carried a weight that surprised even him. I was wrong. Let me help. This isn't your fight, Reyes. Julian's jaw tightened. You saved my daughter. You gave me my life back. If you think I'm going to stand aside while you walk into a trap alone, you don't know me at all. There was steel in Julian's voice, the quiet strength of a man who had faced poverty, loss, and desperation without ever breaking. Dominic recognized that strength. It was the same strength he had seen in his sister all those years ago. There is something you can do, Dominic said slowly. Something that requires someone Corsetti won't be watching. He explained the plan. Julian would contact the police, provide them with evidence of Corsetti's operation, lead them to the warehouse's back entrance at exactly the right moment. It was dangerous. It required perfect timing. And it put Julian in the crosshairs of people who wouldn't hesitate to kill him. Julian didn't hesitate. Tell me what you need. Before Dominic could respond, a small voice came from the couch. Uncle Nick. They both turned. Mira was awake, sitting up, her dark eyes fixed on Dominic. You're coming back, right? Dominic crossed the room and knelt beside her. I promise. Pinky promise? He felt something shift in his heart as he hooked his pinky finger around her tiny one. Pinky promise. Mira studied his face with that unsettling wisdom that children sometimes possess. Good, because daddies always keep their promises. Even pretend daddies. The warehouse at Pier 17 stood like a monument to human cruelty. Its windows were boarded shut, its loading docks sealed except for one entrance that Corsetti's men watched with lazy confidence. Dominic approached alone, exactly as instructed. He walked with the measured pace of a man who had faced death before and won. His footsteps echoed against the concrete, each one counting down to a confrontation 15 years in the making. The door opened before he could knock. Vincent Corsetti stood in the entrance. He was 52 years old, with silver hair and the lean build of a man who had survived through intelligence rather than strength. His eyes were cold, empty, the eyes of someone who had stopped caring about consequences long ago. Dominic Valenti, the King of Brooklyn, finally decided to join us. Where's my nephew? Safe, for now. Corsetti stepped aside, gesturing for Dominic to enter. But first, I want you to understand something. You think you're different from me. You think your precious code makes you noble. But we're the same, Valenti. We both build empires on blood and call it business. I don't kidnap children. No, you just destroy lives in other ways and tell yourself it's justified. The warehouse interior was exactly what Dominic had expected. Shipping containers converted into makeshift cells. Guards positioned at strategic points. and the overwhelming stench of fear that came from children who had been terrorized for days. But Dominic also noticed what Corsetti couldn't see. The tiny red dots of laser sights from snipers positioned on rooftops across the street. The barely visible movement of his men who had entered through the drainage system 2 hours earlier. And somewhere outside, Julian Reyes was leading a team of police officers to the back entrance, armed with enough evidence to put Corsetti away for life. Corsetti had prepared a trap, but he had walked into a larger one. "Your sister," Corsetti said, leading Dominic deeper into the warehouse. "Serena, wasn't it? She had her mother's eyes, same eyes your nephew has." Dominic felt his blood turn cold. Same eyes she had the night her car went off the bridge. The world seemed to stop. "That was you." Corsetti's smile held no warmth. "She found out about a shipment, was going to talk. I gave her a choice. Stay quiet or face consequences." He shrugged. "She chose wrong. 15 years. 15 years Dominic had believed his sister died in an accident. 15 years he had blamed himself for not being there, for not protecting her, for building a world that ultimately swallowed her whole. And all along, the man responsible had been operating in his territory, targeting children, building an empire on the suffering of innocence. "You want to know why I don't care about your code?" Corsetti continued. 22 years ago, I had a daughter, Amelia. She was 8 years old. A drunk driver, son of a senator, ran a red light, killed her instantly. He got 6 months probation. 6 months for my little girl's life." Something flickered across Corsetti's face. Pain, ancient and unhealed. After that, lines stopped meaning anything. The rich, the powerful, they take what they want and face no consequences. So I decided to make them pay. "Julian Reyes isn't rich," Dominic said quietly. "He's a mechanic who borrowed money to save his dying mother. Collateral damage. His daughter is 7 years old. Same age your Amelia was." The words hung in the air. For just a moment, something human flickered in Corsetti's dead eyes. Recognition. Maybe even regret. Then it was gone. "It doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters anymore." "You're wrong," Dominic said. "It matters. Every child in this warehouse matters. Every family you've destroyed matters. And my sister mattered." He spoke clearly into the hidden microphone in his collar. "Execute!" The warehouse exploded into controlled chaos. Lights cut out. Smoke grenades filled the air with thick gray clouds. Flashbang grenades disoriented Corsetti's guards, giving Dominic's team the seconds they needed to establish overwhelming tactical advantage. At the same moment, Julian led the police through the back entrance. They had warrants, evidence, everything needed to make this raid legal and permanent. Corsetti's men found themselves trapped between Dominic's soldiers and the full force of the NYPD. Through the chaos, Dominic moved with purpose born of decades of experience. He knew exactly where Caleb was being held. He had memorized every corner, every turn, every obstacle between him and his nephew. The door to the isolation room was reinforced steel. It took Dominic exactly 4 seconds to breach it. Caleb sat tied to a chair, his face bruised but his eyes defiant. When he saw Dominic, something shifted in his expression. Recognition, relief, and something else. "You're him, aren't you? The one who's been sending the birthday cards." Dominic's hands shook as he cut through the restraints. "You knew. I found your name on an envelope when I was 10. I never told anyone. Why didn't you try to contact me?" Caleb rubbed his wrist where the ropes had left red marks. "Because Mom's foster family said you were dangerous, that you stayed away to protect me. I figured if you wanted to be in my life, you'd come when you were ready." Dominic felt tears burn behind his eyes. "I thought keeping you at a distance would keep you safe. I was wrong. I'm so sorry, Caleb." The boy looked at him with Serena's eyes, with Serena's quiet strength. You came tonight. That's all that matters. By dawn, it was over. 7 children were rescued from the warehouse. Paramedics treated their injuries while child services coordinated with families who had spent days or weeks in terror. Vincent Corsetti was led away in handcuffs, his empire dismantled, his secrets exposed. The Benedetto family, seeing their pawn captured and their plan exposed, retreated back to their own territory. The message had been sent. Julian had done his part perfectly. The evidence he provided ensured Corsetti would spend the rest of his life in prison. Justice, not revenge. The legal system would handle what Dominic's rage demanded he handle personally. But watching Corsetti disappear into a police car, Dominic felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion, and a strange sense of peace where his anger had lived for so long. You could have killed him, Julian said quietly. No one would have blamed you. 15 years ago, I would have. Dominic watched the police lights fade into the Brooklyn morning. But tonight I realized something. Revenge doesn't bring anyone back. Serena wouldn't want me to become a monster in her name. So you let the law handle it? Justice, not revenge. That's the difference between us and them. The bakery was warm with morning light when Dominic returned. Carmela had kept Mira fed and comfortable through the long night, reading her stories when she couldn't sleep, holding her when nightmares crept in. Mira was curled up on the couch, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her small chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. She woke the instant the door opened. Uncle Nick! She launched herself across the room and into his arms, nearly knocking him over with the force of her embrace. You came back! You kept your pinky promise! Dominic held her tight, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. I told you I would. Behind him, Julian entered with Caleb. The teenage boy looked exhausted but unbroken. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, uncertain of his place in this moment. Mira pulled back from Dominic's embrace and noticed the newcomer. Hi, I'm Mira. Uncle Nick saved me too. Caleb's serious face softened into something approaching a smile. I heard. He's pretty good at that. Epilogue. 1 year later, the building at Pier 17 was unrecognizable. Where a warehouse of horrors once stood, a community center now thrived. Children played in bright rooms filled with books and toys. Parents attended financial counseling sessions designed to keep them from ever becoming desperate enough to seek help from predators like Vincent Corsetti. The sign above the entrance read, Serena Valenti Foundation for Child Protection. Inside, Dominic watched as Mira, now 8 years old, attempted to teach Caleb how to draw a butterfly. The 15-year-old was failing spectacularly, his butterflies looking more like deformed bats. But Mira's patient instructions and encouraging praise made him keep trying. Julian appeared at Dominic's side, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She's something else, Julian said, nodding toward his daughter. She is. You've raised her well. I had help this past year. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the children. In 12 months, so much had changed. Dominic had formally adopted Caleb, giving the boy the family he had been denied for 14 years. Julian had taken over management of a garage Dominic owned, tripling its revenue through skill and determination. And Mira had simply decided that Dominic was family, regardless of what any legal document might say. You know, Julian said carefully, Mira asked me something last week. What's that? She asked if you could be her other daddy. Said every kid should have a backup daddy in case something happens. Dominic's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. What did you say? I said I'd have to ask you. Julian met his eyes. But honestly, I'd be honored if you said yes. You gave us our lives back. You're already family. Before Dominic could respond, Mira came running over, a piece of paper clutched in her hands. Uncle Nick, I drawed our family. See? She thrust the paper toward him. The drawing showed 4 stick figures holding hands. One tall and dark-haired, One medium-sized with kind eyes, one teenage boy with a serious expression, and one small girl with a huge smile. Underneath, in careful crayon letters, she had written, "My family." "That's you," she said, pointing to each figure in turn. "And Caleb, and Daddy, and me. We're all together." Dominic felt his vision blur. "It's beautiful, Mira." She studied his face with that uncanny perception that had marked her from the first moment they met. "Uncle Nick, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." She stood on tiptoe and cupped her hands around his ear. "Remember when I asked you to pretend to be my daddy? I don't think you were pretending. I think you were just practicing." Dominic pulled back to look at her. This extraordinary child who had crashed into his life in a moment of terror and somehow healed wounds that had festered for 15 years. "You might be right about that." Mira's smile could have powered the entire city. "So does that mean you can stop practicing now and just be my daddy for real?" Dominic looked at Julian, who nodded. He looked at Caleb, who had wandered over and was watching with an expression that held hope and uncertainty in equal measure. He looked at Mira, whose dark eyes held the same fierce love, the same quiet courage, the same unshakable faith that had characterized his sister Serena all those years ago. "I would be honored," Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion, "to be your daddy for real." Mira threw her arms around his neck. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew it from the very first day. When I asked you to pretend, you didn't pretend at all. You just loved me right away." Dominic held her tight, feeling Caleb's hand rest on his shoulder, seeing Julian's approving smile. In a quiet alley behind a coffee shop, a 7-year-old girl had asked a stranger to pretend to be her father. She hadn't known he was a man who had lost everything: his sister, his hope, his capacity for love. She hadn't known her simple request would begin the slow work of putting him back together. Sometimes protection comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the most dangerous people become the safest harbor for those who need saving most. What started as a desperate plea in an alley became a family forged in fire and sealed in love. And in a world where power corrupts almost everyone, a little girl reminded a broken man that true strength comes from knowing what's worth protecting, no matter the cost.